This is a composite of, I think, 3 different rides, taking me from LockWood, Nevada to the back of Hidden Valley. So if it cuts and my gloves are different, or all of a sudden there's clouds in the sky when there weren't before, that's the reason why. I wanted to shoot this video to show that you can get from LockWood all the way to the back of Hidden Valley on single track, or mostly single track. There's a couple places where you have to link some trails together with 2-track, but the vast majority of it is just a nice flowy single track, or at least about as flowy as we have in East Reno. And the first section here is a nice warm-up. You're going over some rocks, but mostly just picking your way in between. It's a little bit tricky because, between the rocks is this heavy silt, and it's easy to wash out the front tire, and it's hard to get drive from the rear, especially since I'm using a hybrid gummy tire, which fantastic on hard terrain and amazing on rocks, really terrible in the soft stuff. The next section coming up here is surprisingly tricky. After I get through these rocks, you'll see that it tightens up significantly as the trail winds from one direction to the other, right starting here. And the rocks are just in just the wrong place for your setup, and then you got to drive the front wheel up onto the sides of this little crevice that you're riding in, and then let it fall back down on the loose dirt into the middle. Then it straightens out, and you've got just a nice gradual uphill and popping the front tire over some rocks and things. Overall, I'd call this trail's difficulty mostly easy. There's a few sections that are moderate just because they're a little bit deceptive, but once you've ridden it a few times, you can generally get through without much of an issue at all. There's a couple obstacles that could be classified as hard, but there's always a way around. Like any of the things that would be considered hard, you definitely don't have to hit. And even some of the stuff where it's, just hopping over a rock, or something for fun where it's more of a moderate difficulty thing, you can always opt to go around it rather than hit it. So it's a great trail to just warm yourself up on and have some fun. Because you are able to keep moving pretty well, even in the hot weather, with the lack of any significant shade, and definitely no wind because the mountains on either side of you are stopping anything from getting down into the ravine here, you stay reasonably cool even in the summer. So it's a nice trail to hit if you have really hot weather out here and you want something that's a little bit challenging, but you don't want to die of heat exhaustion. The bike I'm riding here is my 2016 300XC, which has been an absolutely fantastic purchase for me. I was a little bit hesitant as far as whether or not I should have gone with a 4-stroke when I got back into dirt biking in 2016, as for the most part the manufacturers had moved on, but the 2-stroke has been absolutely fantastic, and the chassis development in the 2010s compared to the last time I had been riding dirt bikes back in the late 1990s is amazing. These new bikes are just so good. If you point them at an obstacle and just keep yourself centered over the bike, it really will just sort itself out underneath you without much of a problem. I opted for the XC versus the XCW because I did not like the super low first gear on the XCW, which might have helped me right there since I make a small mistake and stall the bike. But I don't know. For myself, I can use that super low gearing as a crutch and not carry enough momentum and things on the trails. because when you're going that slow, it actually makes you exert more energy. At least I find that I get much more tired if I attempt a section in first gear, whereas if I think about it and I come back in second gear, and I find that I cruise through and I just expend a lot less energy fighting the bike. So, just for myself, it makes a lot of sense to go with the XC. I'm also not the lightest person in the world, so having a little bit more dampening and a little bit stiffer springs is not the worst thing in the world. And it's not like KTM sells either of them with appropriate handguards or skid plate or anything like that. You're forced to buy all that stuff yourself, no matter which you get, so there's no advantage there. So the thing I'm going to be coming up to right now is one of the harder obstacles. The boulders on either side sort of force you to hit it at an angle, and then immediately when you crest the top of it, turn it back the other direction in order to avoid that rock there. I made it through with a dab of the right foot, which is not too bad. I didn't get hung up or anything, so I've never gotten through that obstacle without putting a foot down, just because you're going up facing the left side of the obstacle, and at the top there, you just have to turn the bike hard back to the right. So maybe there's a way to do it without dabbing. I haven't figured it out yet. And then this here is pretty fun. You just sort of jump off this rock back into the middle of the trail. It's tempting to jump it further, but then it makes it impossible to make the turn. And right here, it all smooths out, and you basically are riding on this silt without any rocks. You can probably go a lot faster through here. I generally use this opportunity to sit down on the seat and just catch my breath. My enemy is deep sand and silt. I hate it, and I probably should spend some time really working on getting better at riding the deep sand, but we don't have a lot of it out here, so when it links various parts of trails and things together, I just take it a little bit easy. You can actually see at various points where I will actually aim the bike at rocks and stuff in order to avoid being in the soft stuff. This whole area here actually changed massively about 2 years ago when we had a large, I think it was 2 years ago, I'd have to actually go back and look at the snowfall for the winters to be sure, but the melt at the end of the winter was so substantial that it changed all of these trails significantly. And that was a real shock for me coming from the Midwest, because, I mean, you get a little bit of weather erosion on the trails, but most of the erosion is just from people riding on them and digging down with their tires and stuff. And in the last couple years, they have not changed much. We, unfortunately, been having a little bit of a drought. And even when they got significant snowfall and stuff on the west side of the valley, these last couple of years, we have not gotten much at all on the east side of the valley, which is actually good for me in many respects, because that means that in the winter, more of these trails are rideable. Whereas if we get any significant snow, the knobby just clogs up with it and you can't go anywhere. On the east side, the mountains are a much lower elevation than on the west side, and when there is weather coming through, it generally gets hung up over there, so even in the winter you keep the clear skies and stuff. So your temperatures are relatively mild, and you get the warmth from the sunlight, and it's actually really a nice time to ride is in the winter, so long as there's not a bunch of snow on the ground. I definitely prefer riding in 30 to 50 degree weather in the winter as compared to 100 degree weather like I'm doing right now. And because we have such dramatically different weather on one side of the valley versus the other, I've actually gone snowboarding in the morning and then left the Mount Rose Ski Resort at about 12 o'clock when it starts getting busy, and then come back to my house and then gone out on my dirt bike and ridden for another couple hours before coming back in to make dinner. And the drive from my house to the ski resort is about 20 minutes. So I know they get to do that in Southern California and places as well, but they're covering a much greater distance to accomplish that. You can get from snowboarding to dirt biking here, and your main limiting factor is how fast you can take off the gear for one and get on the gear for the other. The trail starts picking up a few more rocks and things going through here. Shortly, there's going to be another sort of rock face that I go up. And that one actually it took me a while to get the confidence to just go and hit it. But the first time I did, I was shocked, this one right here, at just how easily the bike handles it. It doesn't look like it there, but it's almost straight up and down, and it's probably about 5 foot high, but get some weight onto the rear tire, snap the throttle a little bit to get the front end light, and the bike just goes straight over it without any problems at all. The years of refinement when it comes to these enduro bikes have made such a difference compared to bikes in the past. It never ceases to amaze me when I'm looking at something and I'm really questioning as to whether or not I should attempt it. But the second that I do try it, the bike just handles it without any drama whatsoever. There's going to be a couple places coming up in a minute or two where you're going to see the video chop. And the reason for that is there's a few offshoot trails from this main trail that are quite fun to ride, and I thought it would be nice to just include them in this video. So if you're wondering why the video sort of hiccups and I turn off to the side and then it goes to black and then cuts and I'm back on the main trail, that's what was going on. This trail right here, it's just a lot of fun. It's nice flowing turns. The turns happen up on the sides of the hill here, so you can keep a pretty decent amount of speed. The turns are pretty tight though, so you're definitely first and second gear. You're not really going any faster than that. But it is one of the rare, just super flowy left right kind of trails in the immediate area where I ride. And there have been some people out back in this specific area cutting some new ones that I've seen. So, maybe we're getting some more riders in the southeast. But, another part about riding in this particular area is I almost never see anybody else. And, yeah, it's good and bad. You definitely could run into problems if you crashed and hurt yourself and couldn't move, so recommend carrying a sat phone if you're riding by yourself. But at the same time, you pretty much don't have to worry about trail traffic and things like that. Obviously, it's always a good idea to check your speed if you're going around blind turns or cresting a hill or something. Don't just completely commit to it, but you can be reasonably confident in this particular area that there's not going to be somebody on the other side. It tightens up a little bit at the end of the trail here. And in the spring and stuff, this can be almost unrideable because the runoff just turns it to mud and you can't get any traction or drive as the knobby just gets completely clogged. But we're in the summer right now, so it's bone dry and there's good traction. And coming up to this final part here, just on the other side of that tree, there's a bunch of bushes and logs that fell and stuff, so the trail's blocked. It's hard to tell, but it's basically a V shape that you're down in the middle of here, and the only way to get out of it is to pivot turn to the right, which I am definitely not the best at. And the width of this is about the same width as the rear tire of the bike. And the dirt is actually quite soft, so you can't just sort of ride the clutch and drive yourself out of it, because it's a lot steeper than it looks. So what I end up having to do is pop the clutch a little bit to get the bike to go forward, then let the bike roll backwards and onto the back side of this. So right there. And then when the bike starts to roll forward again, take that momentum, slip the clutch a little bit, and then use that to get up and out of that area. And there's your fallen tree and stuff. The last part of this trail, after I ride through this section, you'll see me make a hard right-hand turn. And that's actually a new trail that, has formed because people have been riding back here, despite me never seeing anybody. And it makes a nice little loop so that you can enter back on this trail that I'd been riding. So I definitely have to keep my eyes open just to make sure I don't miss any new things that have been cut into the mountains in this area, because this part it's not that long, but it's definitely helpful. That there are some other new sections that are a lot longer and really quite a bit of fun. And then you can see right here, I'm just going to drop right back down onto the trail where I was just riding up. So we're going to get a hard cut and back to the main trail. Coming up pretty quick here is going to be another side trail. This one's a lot longer than the first, but overall it's very similar. It's the same kind of left, right, left, switchbacks and things where you can ride up onto the side and use the side of it as a berm in order to maintain your momentum. Yeah, they're both about the same difficulty, which is to say very easy and just a lot of fun to ride. There's a couple places on this trail here where you'll see me lose momentum, and that's because you'll notice in a few sections where other people have come through and they've opted, rather than doing these turns, to sort of straight shot and hop over, which I really don't understand why. You're not going to gain a ton of speed or anything by doing that, but that's what they have been doing. So you can see a little bit of that right there. And then some more here where people are just skipping the turns for no apparent reason. And then dropping right back in. I think it's this turn right here where I wanted to go straight on because that's where the main track was. And then I had to slow way down in order to stay in the place that I actually intended to stay. And if you're really paying attention, you'll see that there are some little side trails that even come off of this. I get lost here because I wasn't really sure if I went the right direction. Luckily, my memory was good, and I did. But there are some other little places to ride back off of this trail if you know where you're going. And then coming up shortly, basically right here is where the trail used to end, right as I get to the top. But the people that have been riding here have now started to take it around to the right, and this is actually a reasonably long section. It's quite nice. So, whoever made this one, thank you for sure. It brings you back to where you need to go and is fun to ride. I assure you there is a trail here, it's just hard to see. And by the end of the season, with me riding it and other people riding it, it should become much more defined and easier to follow. It's essentially riding on top of the hill that was on the right side of the trail that I rode up the mountain. You can see I'm kind of looking around at this point because it became a little bit more difficult to follow there for a minute. And even when there's not like a clear trail in these parts of the hills, it's not too bad just to get off of a trail and go exploring on the bike, because there's, any of these bushes you can just straight over. They actually offer really good traction if you're trying to climb up something and you're struggling. It seems counterintuitive that you aim for the bush, but the dirt's so soft that you just won't get any drive out of that. So you run over one of these bushes, and then the knobbies grip really well on that, and you can pop yourself right up and over a lot easier than trying to pick your way between them on an uphill. On a downhill, probably want to avoid them. You can potentially get a puncture, but knock on wood, that's not really been an issue for me, at least. So I guess I got to give some credit there to Shinko and the tires that they make, because they've proven to be quite resilient with running things like that over. This part of the main trail here is going to be blocked once again coming up shortly because of another tree that fell across it. That happened that year. We had all the snow on this side of the valley. The water running down just undermined its root system and everything, and it collapsed directly in the way. So you can see me going around it right there. It's also a good place to stop and take a drink. I spend a pretty good amount of time here just catching my breath, because after this point there's a lot of overgrowth and stuff on the sides of the trail. And hitting it's not really too bad. Sometimes it'll catch and pull on the jersey a little bit. Nothing to the point where it's gonna knock into the handlebars and send you off your line or anything like that. But it is a bit of a distraction, something that can just cause you to lose your focus for a second and maybe make a mistake or stall the bike or whatnot, especially when you've been riding for a while and you're starting to get pretty tired. Coming around the next bend here, the trail tightens up a bit, forcing you to do some full lock turns in one direction and then the other between rocks and the aforementioned thorn bushes. And then coming around this corner, it's another case of you've got to pick your way through in specific locations, just because of the way that the sides of the trails are. I probably should get a trail saw and just come through here and chop some of this down, but it's never really caused too much of a problem, so I've been kind of lazy about it. It's not like it's actually blocking the trail. And some of the things that are big enough to block the trail, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to move out of the way myself. At least not without a chainsaw to chop them up. And I don't know how good of an idea that is to ride back here with a chainsaw. I have actually seen dirt bike fork mounts for them, so I know there are people that do that. But yeah, my confidence level and desire for riding back here with one of those attached to the bike, no, not going to be doing that. Coming around the corner here, there is a nice tree that provides some shade and a good opportunity for me to stop and take a drink and catch my breath again. This here I would consider sort of the end of that section of the trail, where it's that loose dirt with some of those small to medium-sized rocks in it. The last section of the trail here that I consider this lower area, it has two final obstacles. One looks fairly intimidating, but it's actually quite easy. And the other one, conversely, looks pretty easy, but is a little bit tricky because of the approach. It's also a neat area because you have essentially sort of like these cliffs going up on either side of you here. And in the spring, there's running water coming down through here, and this is a little rocky waterfall. And then when you come around the corner to this side, what I actually do is I need to ride up on the right side here because I need to cut back hard to go over that, which doesn't look like much in the video, but it's basically straight up and down and a couple feet high and off camber to the direction you're turning. So that's why it's tricky. If you don't have the right momentum and turn angle, it's easy to stall the bike and get stuck on it. This next part here is all basically loose sand and kind of flowy single track. I'm definitely missing my lines at this point, just bouncing back and forth and not having the energy to fight the bike necessarily into the places that I should be putting it. Here I completely lost the trail. That's because I did. It actually just went to the left a bit sooner there, but there was a little bit of a track that went out to the side, and yeah, just being tired and not focused, I took the completely wrong path. Higher up on the trail here, later in the year, I have to come through and then move a ton of tumbleweeds and bushes and stuff that as they dry out and then uproot from the ground, for whatever reason, they all end up down in here and clogging up the trail. And it's a little bit of a problem on most of the trails, but for whatever reason, this one in particular seems to get a lot of that debris late in the year. That's actually the reason why this high line up here exists. But it turns out to be more fun than the lower line anyways, so I ride it every time. And then up here, I pick up one of the main fire roads back in this part of the desert. We can look down from here, and that's into Hidden Valley, but not rideable. So I have to go up and over this mountain and then pick up single track on the other side, which is fair enough because this is a really fun climb. The first part here is just all about momentum. It's pretty steep, but you got a good run up to it, and you're just going to carry that forward. And then once you get to here, you pick up good traction on these rocks, and you have no problem just sort of getting over the hump. Through here, it's really off-camber, and it's all loose sand, so you just have to take it a little bit slow in order not to slide off the path. Sort of drift to the bottom and then cut back hard to the right to go over that, which is off-camber and a bit awkward, even though it looks like nothing on the GoPro. The next section of the climb here steepens quite a bit after this left-hand turn, and momentum is really important because it's a pretty blown-out trail. There's traction, but there's not a ton of traction. It tends to be off-camber, so you can kind of see that I'm riding on the edge of a rut in a lot of places. The side of the tire definitely digs in and helps get you some drive going up. And then right there, the hard part of the climb is over, and then it's a nice easy cruise up to the top of the mountain over here. This next part of the ride, I kind of had to make up. There's not really a trail that links together this area I'm at here with where I need to get to pick up the single track to drop myself back into Hidden Valley. So I looked at it quite a bit on Google Maps just to try and see where I might be able to find a reasonable way through. And then luckily, I was able to find a couple horse trails as they crossed the side of the mountain that were pretty rideable. The camera, unfortunately, just does not pick them up very well, so it makes it look like I'm just side-hilling across where there's no path, but that's really not the case. And that little bit of a path makes a huge difference. And as I continue to ride these horse trails on the side of the mountain here, each time they get better, they get more defined, and it just becomes easier. Coming up over here, I stop, I lose where I was supposed to go. And one thing that you do have to be careful of is if you do come to a stop on the side of the mountain like that, you have to be really gentle feathering the clutch and not to break traction with the rear tire, because you'll just start to slide down the side of the mountain. And right here, there is no path that actually links up with that single track you can now see on the screen, so I'm making my own. You can see I've ridden this a couple times before, but it has not cut out a defined trail yet. And this is probably the nicest single track on this side of the valley. It's pretty wide, and it's actually fairly level, where a lot of our single track ends up very narrow and off camber. This is one of the first trails I found when I moved here, and it's still one of my favorites. You have a great view of the valley off to the side. It's also pretty forgiving in most areas in that if you put a tire off the side of it, you can get back on easily, and you're not going to find yourself going down the side of the hill unable to recover from the mistake. I have had to, at various times, get when either losing the front or losing the rear off the trail, the bike ends up just sliding down the side of the hill, and you're a lot of times in a place where riding out the bottom isn't an option, so you have to drag the bike back up the hill and back onto the trail, which is not fun. In this area up here, there's about 3 or 4 different trails that all meet up, and you can go down back into the hills. You can go off to the right where I choose to go, which takes you to Hidden Valley, and a couple trails that just take you to the tops of the various mountains in this area. There's one of them that goes to probably the tallest mountain that's sort of right behind my house here. But that one I have not been brave enough to ride. It gets very narrow and sheer rock drop-offs. So, maybe one day, but not brave enough for that yet. The single track here is really tricky just because it's very narrow and it's just off camber the whole time. This final part of the ride here is basically all downhill on a single track going to the floor of the valley. It's not difficult at all in this direction. It's actually a little bit boring. It's actually much more fun going uphill because there's not very much traction and it sort of winds back and forth. You need to modulate the throttle and be really careful not to let the rear tire break loose. Whereas on the downhill, it's not really a factor at all. You basically can idle your way all the way down without much effort. I don't ride the trail all the way to the valley floor. There's a lot of mountain bike trails and stuff behind Hidden Valley, and I don't want to get into their area. Yeah, I'm assuming that they don't really consider this part of the mountain biking trails because I never see anybody up this high. They have two nice tight turns. The second one, there's a rock that you can put your foot on to make a nice pivot turn if you have to. I am getting a whole new motivation, though, to take these trails at a less leisurely pace because, my God, at 40 plus minutes into this video, I am definitely running out of things to say. It's funny, I never see anybody come up this trail, even though it's really fun. Anybody I ever see coming up over from Hidden Valley is on the trails that are a little bit more to the north, which are basically just rocky two-track that it's not the best riding, but nobody bothers to come this way. Yeah, I don't know if people just are not aware of it, or it is that you really, I guess you have to go through some areas on the bottom part of the valley in order to access the start of this trail, and you're just not allowed to do so. I'd really like to thank anybody who's managed to stick around to this point in the video. I'm nearly to the end here. I definitely learned a few things from making it. Not just to ride faster, but I probably didn't need to include the branch trails that I did in the middle of the video. No matter how much I enjoyed them, probably wasn't the wisest idea to add to the duration of a video that was already going to be pretty excessive. The point that I choose to end the trail at here, at the top of this red hill that's coming up, the trail does continue on beyond the point where I stop, but it pretty much just drops straight down to the valley floor, and I don't want to get myself in trouble by ending up someplace where you're not supposed to have a dirt bike. So I figure it's just safer to stop the ride there versus continue all the way to the bottom.